Welcome, I'm Jessica Braswell. I'm here to explain the when and where and whys of assessment. Tests, quizzes, exams, midterms, finals. What are they? How do we differentiate between when we should use what? We can keep it pretty simple. Formative, summative. Interim is another type of test in there, but really as a classroom teacher, you shouldn't worry about those too much. Those aren't used quite so much by the classroom teacher, and they're used more by the external forces, such as your school, your district, or the state. Formative. These formative assessments are the small assessments that you give to measure the clear, specific, smaller goals as you are completing a unit. So it's kind of like you're checking in to see, did you get it, did you not? Summative is what you give at the end of a unit to make sure they got it all. Did you miss any big ideas? Do I need to go back over them? Perhaps in my next unit, maybe should I incorporate some standards that we'd already gone over to really hit the mark home to make sure that you get it. Formative are also these given by these classroom teachers. Summative, again, classroom instructor, but also summative is given by the state too. So you have your end of course exams where teachers like to give finals, but also the state likes to give a final too to make sure that not only does the classroom teacher say you've got it, but the state makes sure that you've met their baseline as well at the end. Interim assessments are predictors. They're with the state, the school district, the school board, your administration. They like to give these to check in and say, hey, we have a big test coming up at the end of the year that's really important for the student, school, and the district. How's it looking like your students are going to do on that assessment? They use that data to then say, okay, it looks like we're making progress towards our end goal. Now, these don't always align with the classroom instruction. So sometimes the standards that they're checking you on, you haven't necessarily covered yet. That's okay. Just remember, you do need to cover those. And if you're not doing well on that standard and all of your students have done poorly on that standard, make sure to double check that standard as you go forward. Again, formative assessment, those are your small check-ins. Summative are the big, did they get it all at the end? I love this pyramid because it really gives you the idea. The formative are all the little ones, and they all lead up to that final summation of assessments. This interim, this kind of breaks it down to you about how often and what it's used for. I like to give this to my new teachers to help them understand when and where, and it's a good little handout that they can clearly and easily see. I love this quote. When the cook tastes the soup, it is formative. When the guest tastes the soup, it is summative. Okay, so as you're cooking and I need to add a little bit, I need to take a little bit away, maybe I need to give a little base. As you're testing this soup, you're modifying your recipe going forward to ensure that by the end, it tastes right. You're forming that soup. By the end, you've added it all together. You have a sum total of all the learning, and you've got your summative. So again, formative, used to guide your instruction and help you evaluate individual students, their needs, and where you need to go back, cover, help out some more, maybe re-explain. And summative is the final, so how did we do? Okay? When we say assessments, we don't always mean exams, okay? There's this notion that I need to give a paper and pencil exam, and I need my students to fill this out, and they need to write an essay, and they need to do multiple choice. Okay, it doesn't matter what the assignment is. What matters is what you're looking for with the assignment. Anything can be an assessment. Anything the student creates and produces, whether it's a traditional test and quiz, or it's a performance, or a portfolio, or a project. Presentation. Even as teachers, as we were completing the College of Education, There were different signature assessments we have to do. That's our portfolio. And at the end, when we turn in and submit all that work to the state, that's our summative assessment. And it's made up of all these little formative portfolio projects that we turned in, and our teachers wrote us back and said, oh, you need to correct this. And it gave us a chance to really master those projects. Formative assessment, research. So this is to reduce the discrepancies between what I think you taught, what I think you were learning, and what you actually learned. So I think I taught this to you, but you learned this. Uh-oh, I need to go back, and myself as a teacher, I need to tweak my instruction so that you're getting the same thing as I'm teaching. Sometimes I taught it, some got it, but some didn't. Maybe I need to differentiate my instruction a little bit. Maybe I need to make better accommodations. So it gives us a chance to really look at how we are doing as teachers and how the students are doing at learning the material as well. It also can be used for your students to understand how they're doing as students. So we reflect on our own teaching, but guess what? Your students are reflecting on their learning just as much. And you want them to do that because mastery, goal orientation makes the learning environment more predictable for the students. It leads to stability for the students. And when students have bought in and taken ownership of their own learning, you have better engagement and you have more adaptability and a greater level of involvement from the student, which leads to a higher level of success. Also, there's been some great studies at Marzano. He took a study and he broke it all down, and he learned that the more formative assessment you give, the better the students do. Tenants of formative assessment. Okay, they must be tied to the processes in the classroom. This is why the interim assessments that are given by outside sources are not formative assessments. Your STAR reading test is not formative because it is not tied directly to your classroom instruction. You didn't make it. Unless you are teaching the test is not part of your formative or summative assessment. How is an EOC a summative if we're not teaching the test? Because we're following the standards. So if we're following the standards as part of our education, then we are teaching the test. And the summative does work to gauge our teaching. But formative assessment especially must be tied to the classroom experience. So interim assessments don't count. Which goes to what we're talking to here in these quotes, the hijacking of the formative assessment. All these testing coordinators want to use these catchphrases that they know we use because then it sounds enticing. Oh, buy this now. It's a great formative assessment. Allows you to... No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work because it's not directly tied to my classroom instruction unless I buy the packaged curriculum, which a lot of these places are looking to sell you also. So keep that in mind. One of the best ways as administrators and leaders of the school that we can do to support teacher leadership and teachers inside the classroom with their formative assessments, trust them. You've got to trust your teachers. You hired them, you interviewed them, you said, hey, this teacher's good enough to work for me, so let them do their jobs. Give them the tools, the opportunities, and the strategies that they need in order to give those formative assessments and make them meaningful. Research using formative assessments. One of the strongest findings from the research on formative assessment is that the frequency of assessment is related to the student academic achievement. If you go through and you check out my resources for the Marzano 2007 classroom instruction book that he put out, he shows you how he broke down another study that Bankert, Downs, Kulik, and Kulik did, where they analyzed the frequency of assessment to the results that were gained from the students. They found the more frequent the test, meaningful test, don't just give them a test to test them, but the more frequent the meaningful test, the better that the students did overall. So we have evidence that assessing students works. A lot of times you can assess them without telling them they're being tested though. So no need to say, hey, I'm quizzing you, hey, I'm quizzing you. But the reason it works is because of the feedback. Students do best when given feedback. So make sure that you're not just stamping a grade and moving on. Make sure you're going over those tests and quizzes and showing them how to improve. Again, interim assessments, they have their place, guys. They really do. I talk about them like they're this big evil thing, but they're not. They have their time and place. And really, there's we have the meta academia above us in administration and at the district, at the school board, the leadership teams, the coordinators for the departments. They need this data. They need to be able to check in and say, okay, this is what we need to do so that they can better support you through professional development experiences, curriculum experiences, guides, mini lessons, things like that. So interim assessments are also good as well. They give the school a way to check in and see where things are going. However, again, be careful with them because they don't align to your classroom instruction. So if your kids don't do great at them, don't take it too harsh. Figure out where the discrepancy is, and if it's something you haven't taught yet, that's fine, as long as you get to it before they take that summative at the end. I'm sorry, the formative at the end of the year. No, summative. I was right. Summative at the end of the year. You want to make sure you hit those. Purpose of summative assessment is to check and see the final level of mastery. Are we here? Did we make it? Are we all here together? Did we pull through? Summatives need to be sparse and sparing because this is the culmination of everything. You can't keep culminating everything. It gets to be too much. These are also high stakes tests. The kids know that they're high stakes, so it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. We'll get to that at the end. A summative score should never be derived from a single assessment. It's too much. If a kid has a bad day and their entire grade, their entire everything is riding on that one test and they don't get to retake it, that's not really fair to them. Even SATs, they're allowed to do over. So we need to keep that in mind. There's retakes for almost all the major tests. Don't be afraid to use retakes in your classroom as well. The purpose of all we do is for our students' success. If you're not willing to give them all the tools that they need to succeed, what are we doing here? So remember, high stakes testing causes stress, psychological trauma, physical issues. The stress can lead to actual vomiting, and I don't know if you've ever proctored the SATs or FSA, but there's actual directions on how to handle it when kids vomit all over their test because it was so common. So please keep that in mind. Be graceful and gracious with your students as far as pressure goes. Side note, there's another type of test that isn't much talked about, the CRT test, Criterion Reference Test. These are access testing, kindergarten testing, FSA testing, high school equivalency testing used to measure masteries. These are great. They have their purpose and they're looking for one specific thing, however. Final thoughts. Marsano, again, because he's amazing. The most powerful single modification that enhances achievement is feedback. The simplest prescription for improving education must be dollops of feedback. So in that soup, don't forget to add that feedback. Thanks. Don't forget to make considerations in your testing for ethnocentric assumptive norms. So don't just assume that because you grew up in that environment and you know these things as a baseline for your culture, that it's a baseline for everybody. You need to be mindful of gender, racial, and religious norms and try and steer away from using those, as well as experience biases. Your assessments also need to be legally defensible if challenged by a parent, a state, or your administration, or make it so that your union can defend it as well. So keep that in mind as you're creating these assessments. Thank you.